Hmm. James, is that still getting cut off?
Yes, sir. It looks like we're live also. So,
Great, great. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to give it just a minute for everyone to come on, and we'll start in just a moment. All right, let's get underway. Thanks everyone for joining here today. This is another edition of our Secretary Speaker Series, where we bring experts and leaders and big thinkers from across California to be in conversation on important priorities that we have. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I lead our California Natural Resources Agency. And one of the most fun and important parts of my job is moderating conversations like these. So if you've never joined us in one of these conversations, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. For those of you who have joined, you know that we have a couple of things that we do during the conversation that is meant to maximize the information and the interactivity of our discussion. My colleague Geeta Chandra will be staffing the chat function of the platform. So make sure to open your chat box, because as we introduce our speakers and talk about different topics, there'll be all sorts of information provided in the chat, which will be really helpful. There's also a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So at any point during the conversation, if you have a question or an observation, you should click on the Q&A button and send it our way. We can answer those questions on the keyboard, and when we do, everyone will see the questions and the answers. And then some of the questions I'll bring into our conversation once our panelists get in a group. We are recording the conversation as well, so by the end of the day or first thing tomorrow on our resources.ca.gov website, we'll have a recording that you can share with others. We'll also have a copy of all the information provided in the chat. So don't feel like you have to take notes if you see good information coming to you in the chat. You simply have to go back to the website and you can copy that information. So let's get underway. Today we are, of course, talking about climate change, its impacts, and most importantly, what California is doing about it. Now, in California, we know we're on the front lines of climate change. Our Mediterranean climate, like similar climates around the world, is particularly impacted by climate change. And we've experienced those impacts. Increasing catastrophic wildfire, more longer and more punishing droughts, more intense flooding, extreme heat and heat waves, coastal erosion, and all the impacts of sea level rise. And our state leaders years ago anticipated these cascading and accelerating impacts. And our state legislature and the previous governors passed a law that requires our agency, the Natural Resources Agency, to bring together all state agencies and every 3 years update a California adaptation strategy. Now, many of you may be working in this field and live this topic day to day, but for those who don't, I just want to break down that term, climate adaptation. It's actually pretty simple. It's adapting. How do we adapt to these changing conditions and these extreme events from climate change? And how do we build our ability to weather these events and these conditions and continue to thrive? We call that resilience. So our climate adaptation strategy is all about adapting, protecting our people and our places from climate change, and building our resilience, our ability to weather and continue to thrive and prosper amidst climate change. So what does this look like day to day? I wanted to provide a few examples. So James, if you can bring up slides and just remind people of the kinds of things we're talking about when we're talking about climate adaptation. It's things like schoolyard greening, bringing more shade, bringing more grass to schoolyards across the state and communities across the state, particularly those with not a lot to begin with, and in parts of the state that are really hot. Example, there's some great work happening in Los Angeles, thanks to partners down there, about greening up schoolyards. Next slide. It's also about restoring the health of our landscape and reducing catastrophic wildfire risk. Here we have our California Conservation Corps with a landscape health project, thinning out the forest based on ecological prescriptions to reduce the chance of a small fire becoming a big fire. Next slide. We also know that we have to get prescribed fire back on the landscape. This is safe, controlled fire that indigenous communities have been practicing in California for thousands of years. Our state, sadly, outlawed this practice through some kind of ill-informed conclusions about it, but we know that we have to get more good fire on the landscape. That's another example of an adaptation action. Next slide. It's also hardening our infrastructure. We have a lot of infrastructure across the state, fourth largest economy in the world, 40 million people living here. It's all about ensuring that the infrastructure we have is more resilient to climate change. So this is a photo of a worker with a transmission line. Of course, a lot happening on the energy infrastructure, but also our transportation infrastructure to ensure that it's resilient to impacts. Next slide. It's also projects like this community microgrid at the Blue Lake Rancheria, which is a tribal government in far northern California in Humboldt County. Here we're looking at solar panels and a grid that actually stays energized when there are large utility blackouts, when those occur. So I have a friend that lives in Blue Lake, and he's told me that when there's a public safety power shutoff, folks come to Blue Lake Rancheria for their energy needs. Huge thanks to the tribal government. Microgrids across the state proliferating in tribal lands and beyond. A great example of an adaptation action. Next slide. It's also environmental restoration and nature-based solutions. This is a slide at the Upper Truckee Marsh in Lake Tahoe and the restoration of the wetland there. We've lost 95% of our wetlands across the state. Major environmental and ecological impact of those changes, but we've also reduced the ability of our rivers to flow over their banks safely during flooding events. So restoring more wetlands is a critical nature-based solution that's also an adaptation action. Next slide. And then, of course, it's helping our ecosystems restore their health. In this case, this is a fish and wildlife personnel, scientists putting salmon back into the river. We know that healthy natural systems are needed for our own healthy communities and healthy and safe communities. So this is, again, a nature-based solution. Next slide. And then all the work happening across agriculture in California. This photo is a woman working with some infrastructure on the farm to optimize water efficiency, but also nutrients into the soil. We've got a great program through our Department of Food and Agriculture called Healthy Soils, getting more organic matter back into soils. Another great example of adaptation action. So these are just snapshots of different types of activities that really encompass adaptation. I think for too long, climate adaptation was sort of a wonky policy conversation, when in fact now it's about taking real action in our communities to protect people and places from climate change. I'm so excited that a little bit later into the conversation, we're going to be talking to some community leaders in different parts of the state taking action and leading action. So we're really trying to flesh out exactly what we mean. But before we do that, what I'm so excited about is this is an all-of-government approach. So you're talking to one agency secretary, but the fact is our adaptation strategy bridges all of these different efforts by CAL FIRE or Caltrans or Department of Water Resources or Department of Public Health. This adaptation strategy is an overarching guide that really ensures that the billions of dollars that we're spending adjusting to climate change are well spent and speak to our priorities. So to share more about that overarching guide, this adaptation strategy update, I want to introduce my colleague, Amanda Hansen. Amanda and her team and so many other colleagues across state government are breathing life into this strategy so it actually guides our actions. Over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Wade, and hello to everyone. As Wade mentioned, I am going to walk everyone through not just the latest update to our climate adaptation strategy, but some of the history behind that strategy and how we ended up where we are today. James, would you pull up my slides? Okay, great. So I've broken down some of the history into a couple of phases. And as Wade mentioned, that first phase I would characterize as largely planning. So next slide, please. We issued the first climate adaptation strategy at the end of 2009, and it was the first in the nation. Next slide. Since then, we've updated it pretty regularly, and this is called for in statute. Next slide. Early versions of the strategy focused on sector-specific action. So you can see from these tables of contents here, you've got water, you've got agriculture, you've got forestry, you've got oceans, etc. Next slide. The challenge is we realize that adaptation efforts don't often fit into one of those neat boxes. And in fact, they often cut across several of them. And it was hard to see that in our strategies because we've been organizing them by sector. So here's an example of an adaptation action that cuts across multiple sectors. Dos Rios is the state's newest state park, and it was restored from farmland. Not only is the work that was done to restore this land and to currently maintain it, not only does it reduce flood risk to communities, but it also builds soil health to retain nutrients and hold more water. It increases forest health of trees and forests along the river, and rebuilds habitat for our biodiversity to be sustained. So just this one effort really shows how many adaptation actions cut across multiple sectors. Next slide. So in 2018, we updated our strategy again, and we really worked to show some of that connectivity by the use of these icons. So next slide will actually show, we have some actions that the state is taking, and then where we can identify how those actions this is an example of public health. So these are actions that our public health agencies feel are critical for climate adaptation, and some of them drive on other sectoral adaptation efforts, as you can see by the icons. Next slide. So the other sort of big shift that occurred over time in California is we started experiencing much more frequent and intense climate-driven disasters. So that meant that a lot of state agencies began developing plans to reduce climate risks in their areas of focus. So here are some examples. We have the Climate Adaptation Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, our Water Resilience Portfolio, Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. Next slide. This all leads us to what I think of as phase 2, really focusing on implementation. So as we went into our 2021 update of the Climate Adaptation Strategy, we really started to think about how this statewide overarching strategy can evolve in order to really meet the moment. And I'm going to walk through sort of 6 major changes that we made that we hope shows a positive evolution for our strategy. Next slide. The first is we changed the goal of our strategy. So in previous years, our goal was really to report on state agency actions to adapt to climate change and build climate resilience. We shifted our goal. This statewide adaptation strategy, our goal is to drive strategic and collective action across California. Yes, it absolutely outlines what the state is doing. But as we'll see with the next shift, we're also really hoping to guide action of others in California. Next slide. So we also shifted the focus away from being organized by sector and toward priority outcomes that guide our work. So next slide, you can see there are 6 outcome-based priorities that we have organized our work around. And we're hoping our goal here is to not just guide the state's work, but to guide the work of other partners across the state of California to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Next slide. We changed the format. We went away from a report, a document. These were several hundred pages, and we shifted toward a website. Next slide. This really allows any Californian to quickly identify what is it that the state is doing to address climate change, and how does it all fit together. Next slide. We right-sized our efforts here. So as I mentioned, a lot of work is underway in state agencies to build out very specific implementation plans to deliver climate adaptation in California. And so having our website allows us to essentially outline some of the key pillars of those efforts and then include links to relevant details. So you can see on the next slide, we have an action that is related to increasing the understanding of the effects of extreme heat on worker health and safety. And you can see at the bottom, if you want more details, you can find them by clicking on those links. So it allows people to see the big picture, and then anyone who wants to go deeper, they should be able to access more information as quickly as a click. Next slide. Certainty. Another shift is that we limited inclusion of actions in our state adaptation strategy to those that we're committed to undertaking. So it's very clear that these are actions we are driving on, and not necessarily actions that we think we should drive on or that in the long term we should drive on. They're very focused on what we are committed to doing. Next slide. And lastly, we really increased our accountability with the latest adaptation strategies. So instead of reporting annually as we have done, we also included time-bound success metrics for every single action in the strategy. So what are we going to do and when are we going to do it? We measure our progress toward all of these success metrics every single year and publish that information annually on our website and also submit it to the legislature. Next slide, which leads us to phase 3, which I think of as really delivering results. We largely know what we need to do, and our focus is just laser on getting it done. Next slide. So I mentioned we report annually on our implementation, and through the use of progress indicators, we work with all of our partners who contribute to this strategy to measure our progress every year. Did we say, how close are we to getting the thing that we said we were going to get done? And these are just some examples, like at a glance, of where we were in 2022, where we were in 2023. Next slide. So just thinking about from 2021 to 2024, which was the last strategy, the years that our last strategy covered, we did assess our overall progress and determined that 92% of everything that we said we were going to do is well underway, nearing completion, or complete. And next slide. Also that 2/3 of all the metrics with an end date between those years were completed. So we're on the right track, and really, I think have a lot to show for what we were able to measure. Next slide. Just want to quickly say, next slide, the latest update, something that did not change is just how critical it was for us to develop this strategy with engagement from Californians all up and down the state. Really very, very foundational to the development of this strategy and the work that our agencies do. Next slide. A couple things that were new about the 2024 strategy is, of course, we updated it to include new actions because there were sort of new efforts that were launched. For example, we updated our extreme heat action plan and of course wanted to make sure that that was reflected. We have a lot more focus on equity-centered success metrics because this is something that was called for in AB 1384. And then I think we really made an attempt to take some lessons learned from the 2021 strategy. So for example, these time-bound success metrics, really awesome, except in 2021, we were not super diligent about those timeframes. So for example, sometimes it was a range and sometimes it was, a year way past 2024, et cetera. So really work to clarify what the timeframes should be and how they could be consistent. And similarly, right sizing some of our success metrics. When we say metric, what we're really talking about is a milestone, along the path toward building resilience. And some of these were sort of super high level, others were more detailed. So really trying to get them all sort of right sized and aligned. So I guess I'll just wrap up by saying the adaptation strategy is part of a 3-prong approach to climate adaptation in California. It is informed by best available science, which is California's climate change assessment, tells us what risks are most likely to come between now and 2100. We also have a critical work that our partners at Cal EPA do to essentially assess how has climate change already impacted California. And the strategy is sort of our approach to what are we going to do now to be best prepared for what we think is most likely to come. And so with that, Wade, I'll hand it back over to you. And thanks to everyone for joining today.
Amanda, great job summing up in short time both a long-lasting effort over the last 20 years, but also a really broad effort. So a lot of people in California, if they're active on climate adaptation, might be active in one part of this. Maybe somebody serves on a fire safe council, or they're driving a green schoolyard, or they're a community-based group just trying to understand how their neighborhood's going to be impacted. It's not that everybody has to fully dive in and understand this broad adaptation strategy, but we wanted to connect the dots. Because at the end of the day, yes, we're protecting Californians from each of these impacts, but we want to make sure that all the work we're doing drives on those priorities. First and foremost, protecting the most vulnerable communities, because we know different communities in California have different vulnerability, both on where they live and what they are impacted by, but also their wealth and their ability to withstand these impacts. So that's a great example of keeping our eye on the prize in terms of priorities. So we thought it would be great to thank you, Amanda, for helping understand how this all fits together. And our colleagues put in the chat function a link to that website. So you can look on the chat and click on there, and it gives you a sense of where you can find these things. And basically everything that we're doing on climate adaptation should correspond to these priorities. So we wanted to actually give this strategy life and talk to 3 leaders who are bringing this work to real people in communities across California. So first, I want to introduce a colleague from the American Red Cross, Nathan Millard, who serves as the program manager for community risk reduction. And Nathaniel, you're doing some really important work in Northern California, I think Butte County, and maybe other places. If you could just, when we think about American Red Cross, we think about responding to disasters, helping communities through disasters. I'm interested to know how you guys are plugging into this adaptation work in California, and that's how it's touching the ground. So, and Katie, I should say, just shared your background and your bio. So I won't do it here, but want to thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So talk to us about what is the work that you're doing, and give us some concrete examples of how this is touching down in California communities.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, our lives are crazy. My partner also works for the Red Cross, so she's deployed. She's in Los Angeles right now, still working on the recovery. I think a lot of people don't understand that the Red Cross, she just closed the Maui program after 2 years of working out there doing recovery work, and is still in the middle of that. And I'm deployed to the Tuolumne fires, where we just lost almost 100 homes up there. So, yeah, so I do have some slides also. I don't know if I'll share some slides and I'll jump in there, or and I really want to say thank you. I mean, I know it's crazy right now. Our lives are crazy, but I wouldn't miss this at all to be invited here. Just feel really honored, and to speak next to these other 2 speakers. Naeem's work is incredible in justice work. Her whole life she's done this incredible work, and just honored to even be up here with her. And then Dr. Jennings' work and science and policy, and then Secretary Crowfoot. I just super admire all the work that you've done, especially with bringing tribal lands into all of our California parks and everything. I mean, it's huge. And Jen Phillips, she's one who invited me. I got to meet her little while back, and really the whole California Natural Resource Agency. I'm a Californian, born and raised. I love this state. I love our lands, and that's really where a lot of my heart came from. I'm a reluctant humanitarian, to tell you the truth. Um, and I was going to frame some of my talk around Katrina because 20 years ago, I was a college student and I volunteered with the Red Cross during Hurricane Katrina, almost exactly 20 years ago. Um, and never would I thought I would end up working for the American Red Cross, but I've learned a lot about what the American Red Cross has done recently and what they're trying to do. And it's awesome. And I'm so thrilled to be part of this with the American Red Cross. And so, um, next slide, I'll jump in there. So just to give an idea, the Red Cross, so I started my work about 3 years ago because the Red Cross finally was like, tons of data, right? Disasters are getting they're more frequent, they're larger. We've moved from having a season of disasters to just always having a disaster going on. And the Red Cross has all this data around climate change, and they finally decided they're going to wade into it a little bit and say, okay, it's politically, we really try to focus on neutrality as an organization, but you can't deny some of the data. And they said, okay, knowing that this is what's going on and exponentially more disasters, larger, it was going to take more help. And so this is the one of the plans they put. I wanted to highlight is the focus on health, hunger, and housing, to move from transactional to transformational, and to really think about presence as a mission. And so the program they started was this community adaptation program, which I was the very first team on the ground running in Butte County. So we kind of like started 3 years ago going, we don't even know what we're doing. We're going to go for this. And it was really about realizing that we should work with hyper-local nonprofits, people who are already doing so much of this work, and see how else we can help them. What can we do? Instead of being the kind of organization that flies in and does everything, instead, let's find the organization already doing the work. And the reason I look at Naimeen's work is like, she's the kind of people who are like, yes, they're doing the work. Like what can we do to work alongside them? And I think a lot of people don't realize the Red Cross is always present. It looks like we fly in and leave, but the reality is every 8 seconds, blood is needed. We do all the blood work. Every 8 minutes, there's a home fire in the US. The Red Cross shows up to almost every single, volunteers show up, people's worst day of their life and they lost everything, there to make sure they have like a warm place to stay and a warm meal. Service to armed forces, they do all the communication with armed forces. So I've learned a lot about the Red Cross over the last 3 years, and really love what they do. And this new program of moving into it, I've really learned a lot. And so next slide, I'll kind of hit the one of the big things that I learned right on the ground running was about resilience hubs. And I think now resilience hubs are I think everybody kind of knows they're really ubiquitous, but they're so powerful. And right off the bat, we learned like, oh, this makes sense. Like this is something we can really get behind because it really is taking already known community centers. And so I put some pictures up there. We have the African American Family Culture Center in South Orville. South Orville, in terms of Butte County, and you look at social vulnerability, it's one of the places most underinvested. And here's this nonprofit, the African American Family Culture Center, doing amazing work. And their ED, she's from South Orville. She has this crazy story about of addiction and getting clean and wanting to give back to her community. And we're like, how can we help you? What can we do? We actually put solar panels and batteries with a generator backup to give them 72 hours of resilient power into that place. They have a radio station, so they're a great communicator. But more than anything, we're just constantly calling them, what else can we do? What else can we do to help you? And this idea of resilient hubs, it's like we realize like there's kind of two models out there almost. There's like the $10 million brand new building that does everything, which is wonderful and it has its place. But we really leaned into the small cultural centers and said, man, they're already in there. They already trusted. How can we lift them up and then really connect them all? And so I put priority one here about vulnerable communities because a lot of these centers, the Resilient Hub's background began in Baltimore in 2010. Christian Baja, I think I have shared a link with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network if you want to learn more about Resilient Hubs. it started there. They had a huge snowmageddon in Baltimore. And of course, what community was the last one to get plowed was the one that was the most vulnerable. And so from there stemmed this idea of resilient hubs of like, hey, if we can come together, maybe we have more voice and more power together. And we like the hub and spoke model where it's not just one, but how can we connect a bunch of them together and really gain power and voice? And so in Orville, for example, we have the Orville Southside Improvement Association. We have the African American Family Culture Center, the Hmong Cultural Center, the Hope Center, the Community Action Agency. We've all come together and just really try to prioritize what does South Orville need? How can we lift it up? Um, and so it's been this really amazing part of kind of lifting up a community. And so part of that, I think, I'll go to the next slide, I think. But part of that is recently I was out touring some of the Baltimore Resilience Centers, and I was actually with a bunch of Southeast Asian students, part of this exchange program and learning about resilience. It was interesting because one of the Thai students, very rich Thai student though, and he was like, seems like you have a lot of faith in humanity. Isn't it just economics? And I was like, when you work in disaster, you can't help but have faith because what you see is people run into fire to help strangers. Um, and you see this over and over again. One of our disaster program managers came back from Los Angeles and she said, well, there was somebody in the shelter who was like, why does it take a disaster to bring us together sometimes? And we noticed that here in the campfire in Paradise. We started talking to people and everyone was like, oh, dude, as much as we didn't want the campfire to happen, the way it brought us together as a community was amazing. Um, and I really lean into this idea that people together makes this huge difference. Um, and so, especially right now, right after yesterday's thing, I mean, I think we realize that no matter how different we are, you could hate your neighbor and have the most different political thing over and over again. People will run in to rescue them, though. So, disaster gives me a lot of faith in humanity. And as we're working on these resilience hubs, one of the things that we've really focused on, I brought priority 3 in here, was workforce development. So we partnered with this mobile construction training and said any of the remodels that we wanted to fund in these resilience centers, we wanted at workforce development. So they got in there with people who trot on the trades that could get jobs. We also focused working with Grid Alternatives. If you don't know Grid Alternatives, they're a great program, workforce development around solar. They're amazing in this process too. So we're partnering with them so that not only are we remodeling these centers, if we got the funds for it, we applied for an EPA community change grant for a $20 million grant to really revamp a bunch of decarbonize all these and everything. It was a bummer to see that grant go away with the administration change, but hopefully that'll come around again. I also want to highlight the power of the Red Cross. One of the things that I love that we're able to do as a big organization, we found out that GM had about 100 electric vehicles they wanted to donate, and we said, we'll take those. And part of it, and I'll go next slide in the middle of this. Next slide. Part of the power that we've really done is that we've built a collaborative arm. We built this resilience collaborative where we got 40 nonprofits all together and said, hey, if we work together, we'll get more done. And part of that was GM had 100 vans. Because we were able to articulate why we needed them and how we could use them, we got 12 of those to Butte County alone. We got them to, that North Valley Food Hub because they're doing regenerative ag with small farmers and trying to help regenerative ag get into restaurants and get into the food banks. We got them to the 530 Food Rescue, which is helping pick up rescued food and make sure it doesn't end up in our landfills. We got it to the Butte Environmental Council, who's helping doing compost and tree planting. We got them to the community action agencies for the food pantries. We got them to the Hmong Cultural Center, the African American. We got vans to all these people. They're going out right now. And that really happens part of this collaborative unit, And so there's a website you can see. I shared the link for that too. So you can see our Butte Resilience Collaborative. And we're now working to try to build these collaboratives in every county and every region we can. So, seeing what we can do, because I really think that this idea of collaboratives, it really makes a difference. It's been amazing. And the story I always tell people is when the LA fires hit, all these people from the collaborative start calling me, asking how they could help me. And I realized that when you're part of a collaborative, everybody lifts each other up. And the work that we're all doing is so trauma filled. It's so difficult that you really need people that got your backs. And so this collaborative work is really important. And so just to end my quick time here, I put a picture of Katrina because I thought there's a lot of lessons learned. And the big lesson I was going to leave everyone with during Katrina when I was there, I remember sitting there and Katrina was one of these things where it's like, oh, they cut the mangroves down. And we knew the levees. Like, I can't believe we're in the middle of this disaster. But I kept hearing this talk about how people should leave. Like, hey, New Orleans is like, it's going to keep flooding. People need to move, you know? And I remember going to the shelter and sitting down with some of these women. There's African American women or 80-year-old women in there and talking with them and realizing that they had grandparents who were actual slaves. And I was just like, holy moly, I just blew my mind. And then I realized how they'd never felt safe anywhere before. Like New Orleans and where they lived in their parish, it was like it was home. And I realized that the idea of asking someone to leave home is not legitimate. Like home is, I studied sense of place and Mark Freed's work, and this idea that if you lose home, you lose a lot of hope. And I think what I love about some of this work is building collaboratives and learning to adapt, because you know we might lose our homes, we might lose our houses, but if we can keep from losing our homes, I think we keep from losing hope. So that's some of the work that I think we're trying to do out here.
Well, huge thanks for all you're doing and being so candid and bringing so much heart. One of the consequences of my job is I end up, showing up in the aftermath of a lot of disasters, be it a fire or a flood. And you're so right. I mean, the human spirit and the California spirit of support for each other. My key takeaways are, one, the Red Cross realizes that protecting people from disaster requires climate adaptation and getting in front. And you're a great example of that. Other key takeaways is we need to invest within communities, building up resilience. Don't try to swoop in with the best idea and try to recreate the wheel. There are groups and leaders in those organizations. Invest in them. Partnerships, so critical towards building true community resilience. And then investing in economic growth in the economy of these places, because social vulnerability does correlate to a lack of economic resources. So I'm really quite impressed with all the work you guys are doing up in Butte County. Katie put in some links in the chat, and hopefully we'll get you back into the group conversation. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You referenced Nayamin Martinez a couple of times. Many of us know her across the state. She's educated me on the issues in the part of California she works for. She is the executive director of the Central California Environmental Justice Network. Nayamin, thank you for being here. You could educate us on so many things, but today we're talking about, of course, adaptation and climate resilience. I'm really interested in the work that you do and that your organization does in this area and how you think about the conversation today.
Thank you for the invitation and for allowing us to share the work that CCGN is doing in the Central Valley. And if we can start with the slides, please. So I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to go fast. So CCGN has been working for 25 years to make sure that people in the Central Valley, low-income people of color, have access to clean water, clean air, clean soil, etc. But what have we done in terms of adaptation to negative effects of climate change? I will share just two examples of the work that we do around wildfires and extreme heat. Next slide, please. So while we have been working on improving air quality for over 20 years, it dawned on us the need of protecting vulnerable communities more of these wildfire smoke episodes. And that happened in 2020. We were out there distributing financial assistance to immigrants, and that's when we were having a severe, one of the many wildfires that we had in our region. And people were going out and working without masks, and really, it was the heat, it was the smoke, and we were like, so what's going on? How can we help them? But before doing that, we knew we could not do it alone. We have to collaborate, like it was said in the previous presentation. Collaborations are the key for us to address these major impacts of climate change. And we started with collecting the data that was not existent, because it's important to document so that then that intervention that you develop is based on the needs of these vulnerable populations. So we started on our own first in between June and July of 2021. We surveyed over 300 farm workers. And what we found is that although they knew, more than half knew that their employer had to do something, the matter of the fact is that only 39% of them were receiving N95 masks. So we also asked them, and how would you like to receive information, know about how to protect yourself? And they say text messages. On 2023, we were approached by the California Department of Public Health to say, hey, would you help us understand better the needs of farm workers? And we did it. So based on this more wide survey, they developed a train-the-trainer on the health impacts of wildfire smoke, particularly for community health workers, which I don't know if you're aware, but this is a very ideal way of reaching hard-to-reach populations to give them the information that they need to be protected. Next slide, please. So that was just collecting the data. But for CCJN, we cannot wait for policies to trickle down to our communities. We need to act and bring solutions to the communities that we serve. And that's exactly what we did. So we launched an educational campaign that we have been working for the last 3 years, since 2022. And since then, we have distributed culturally relevant information to over 22,000 farm workers in the Central Valley. We have distributed over 35,000 N95 masks. And not only the masks, like here's the mask, whatever, we explain why N95 masks are needed when you're outside during a smoke episode. We have also educated 4,000 farm workers through direct pláticas, so education, home visits where we sit down with them and explain them, this is the law, this is where you find out what the air quality index is, and this is what your employer needs to be doing. And not only we stop there, we have created culturally relevant materials. Why? Because the education level, the language access is important. We need to make sure that the information that we use is understandable by these farm workers. So we have a wildfire brochure that has a lot of visuals to help them understand better. And we also develop, with our very limited resources, videos. And some of these videos, like the one that is in the link here, is in Spanish with subtitles in English, but it's with the same farm workers that we're educating so that they can feel they are connected and related. They can relate to this information that we're giving them. So we have done a lot of more work on wildfires, including advocating for policy, such as this information being received through text alerts, so that both the employer and the employee knows what to do when the air quality index is over 150. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move on to another topic that obviously affects the Central Valley a lot. I've been living in Fresno for 25 years, and I know that heat is not something new to us. But in the last decade, the heat waves have been sometimes unbearable. Last year, for example, we reached 116 degrees, something that I've never seen in these 25 years. So while there are laws, right, to protect people from extreme heat, especially outdoor workers, we realized that this might not be enough, that these adaptation strategies were not enough. So what did we do is we met with these farm workers and asked, what do you need to really be more prepared for these extreme heat waves? And we designed what we are calling resiliency kits. And in 2023, we start piloting this. So we had distributed since then over 1,000 resiliency kits. You can see them in the slide. It includes a neck fan, a cooling towel, an insulated bottled water, and a heat guidebook. We have also distributed educational materials to over 6,000 farm workers in the Central Valley. And luckily, and just this is an example of collaboration, we applied to the extreme heat program of one of the sister agencies to CNRA, the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program. And we are going to be able to expand this pilot and distribute these resiliency kits to more than 3,000 farm workers in Tulare, Kings, Fresno, and Madera counties in the next couple of years. And most importantly, we're not just doing this and thinking, oh, it's going to be good. We have collaborated with institutions such as researchers at UC Berkeley that they had evaluated our interventions and had demonstrated that they're effective to protect and to build the resiliency of farm workers. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. So we also, and all these, I'm really focusing on some of the goals aligned with the priorities. So we have also promoted programs that are helping institutions, small institutions in the rural areas to access state money. And the example, the picture that you're looking at there is in Terravela, a rural community in southern Tulare County. They have been affected by wildfires. They do not have any brick and mortar building where they can be protected from smoke or heat. So through other work that we were doing with them on climate change, we were able to partner, and also through the grant that I previously mentioned, they are going to be able to build a resiliency center, and that's already the beginning. It broke ground in June of this year. So having these communities that otherwise would not know about this funding, wouldn't have the ability to apply and to get these resources to very vulnerable communities has been very important for us. And then lastly, just one last thing. We are supporting SB 655, Senator Stern, which would allow the state to ensure that dwellings have a proper safe indoor temperature. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nyameen, Nathaniel on the Red Cross, from the Red Cross, really hit on a couple of our key priorities, of course, including prioritizing public health and safety, investing in resilient economies. Your work is incredible and emblematic of our priority to take care most of those most vulnerable communities. And you've powerfully demonstrated partnerships, which is another of our priority, how to get that done. So huge thanks for those concrete examples and for all the work that you're doing. Key takeaway for state government is to partner with the community-based organizations that are already connecting in, who understand the communities they support, going to take the time and energy to reach them with practical interventions. So big thanks, Nyameen. We're going to end with our last speaker, who is going to hit on two of our last key priorities. Dr. Megan Jennings is the co-director of the Institute for Ecological Monitoring and Management and Research and Management. She's a research scientist at San Diego State University. Dr. Jennings, science, a key priority for us. Be driven by science in all of our work on climate adaptation, and then also helping nature help us with these nature-based solutions. Can you talk about your work and how it intersects to all that we're doing on adaptation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Secretary, for having me. And it's my pleasure and privilege to join these other panelists who are doing such excellent work on the ground. The work that we do is, and that I do with many partners and colleagues, so it's not just me, I'm representing all of us, is really about science and service. How do we support communities in making those adaptation goals reality? And a lot of that focuses on conservation because I am an ecologist. So if you could go to the next slide. I'll just touch briefly on, you mentioned two, but I added a third because we do work on nature-based solutions. We want to break down those silos between how we plan for the adaptation in the human environment and natural landscapes, because those two are inextricably linked. And we want to make sure that the science we're producing helps people make decisions. So it's not just about a journal article, but putting real information into people's hands that fits into the way they do the work. But we can't do that without partnerships. Partnerships are at the heart of everything we do. So next slide. I'm going to hit on some examples of the way we've been doing this work. I started thinking about climate resilient connectivity. I've done a lot of this work with my partners at the Climate Science Alliance, and you'll see as I go through, serving a lot of different kinds of partners. When I say community, that's conservation community, natural resource managers, local governments, tribal partners. So in this example, it was California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And they wanted to think about when they take these, when we work on acquisitions to protect land and in particular connect our networks of preserved areas, how do we make sure that that's going to be something that works for us in the future under climate change. So we did a lot of modeling, but we worked hand in hand with them to make sure that met their needs and could inform their planning. And in fact, it's one of the ways that they are thinking about, this is for the South Coast ecoregion here in Southern California, but this is one of the ways that we're supporting meeting the state's goals to reach protection of 30% of our lands by 2030. Next slide. But when we finished that project, we really realized, that's talking to one community. That's really the conservation, natural resource community. What about local jurisdictional planners? How do we work on breaking down those silos that I mentioned? So we moved on to this Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, where we took the heart of that connectivity work, and we said, how do we make this applicable to local jurisdictional planners to think about how do we use that planning to reduce fire risk, to make sure we have sustainable water supplies, that we're protecting biodiversity. So we had a large group of researchers that were part of this. Again, my partners at the Climate Science Alliance were part of this, and the Strategic Growth Council supported this work. And we worked really closely with local jurisdictional planners, in particular, our metropolitan planning organizations, the Southern California Association for Governments, the San Diego Association of Governments, and found out what was the information they needed, where do you have data needs, data gaps, and also to get from the data to thinking about what are the adaptation actions you want to take when you have that data in your hand. You can figure out what the problem is and then decide what you want to do about it. So really supporting that action. Next slide. The real benefit of that and all of this work is that we've really gotten to work closely and be embedded with communities of practice. And another place that we've done that is with the Climate Adaptive Conservation Strategy for Southern California's montane forests. So in that map on the screen, you can see we have montane forests in Southern California. They're small, they're isolated, and they're greatly at risk. And we don't have a lot of information yet about the impacts of climate change on those forests. But they protect our water, they store carbon, they're important landscapes for us. So working with the Forest Service, USGS, with support from the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, and again, my partners from the Climate Science Alliance, we developed this strategy focused on how do we respond to the threats to montane forests, make them more resilient. Again, these are meeting state goals to the resilience goals for fire and forests across California. And so this is really guiding some of our action, but this was all co-produced with managers. We spent a lot of time talking with forest managers. You see links up on the screen there. That takes you directly to a strategy you can use. We have an adaptation menu that our practitioners helped us create. And there's some guidance there to support deciding where do you start on the landscape. These are big problems. How do you chunk it out into tractable bite-sized pieces? Next slide. The last examples I wanted to start with, or I wanted to touch on, were working with tribal partners. The Climate Science Alliance has convened a tribal working group made up of tribal community members, tribal government staff, and tribal organizations across Southern California. And a lot of this is about listening and asking them what are their priorities. And we heard that protecting the plant relatives that are food, fiber, and medicine were really high priorities, understanding climate impacts, and then deciding how to make restoration strategies that would be resilient under climate change. So here we paired Western science with traditional knowledge. So we had partners from UC Riverside joining us on this one, again, funded by the Strategic Growth Council, where we developed some scientific information about what plants are at risk and where and what happens to their habitat and populations. But then there was capacity building training and information about what to do with this and how to take action. Next slide. And that has really led to a wonderful project that has been funded through the UC Climate Action Grants, our collaborative of Native Nations for climate transformation and stewardship. These relationships and partnerships we've been developing and fostering over the years has now led to this project where we took all that information from resilient restoration, and now tribes are putting it into action on the ground. We proposed this project. It was funded by the legislature with funding that went to the University of California system. And we're sending that back out to tribal governments, tribal serving nonprofits. We're working with some other universities to actually put that into action. More capacity building training, demonstration projects, community conversations about how do we want to take more action to support Indigenous-led stewardship and foster those connections to the land again that help us be more resilient, both in the human environment and in our natural landscapes. So last slide, I just wanted to finish by highlighting that I'm not the only one that does this work. We have a whole lot of wonderful researchers in the California State University system, and it is my privilege to now serve as the executive director of the CSU Climate Adaptation Consortium for all of your science research and partnership needs, in reaching our adaptation goals. We are here and encourage you to check out our website and follow us to figure out what we're doing and how we can help you.
Megan, thank you so much for that. It's a powerful presentation, both how you're applying all of the best of Western science to this work, but also this journey that we're all on to recognize that that tribal communities, Native American communities, have been caring for these lands and these resources, our environment, since time immemorial, and helping find networks that support tribal partnership. Almost 300 people joined us here today. Let's bring on everybody back to the screen. We have covered a whole lot, but it's appropriate because climate is throwing a lot at us. And if I hope we conveyed anything today, it's that we're stronger together. Yes, we have these different approaches on fire and water. Yes, there's a different approach in rural Northern California from Southern urban California, but we wanted to highlight your work, the three of your leadership, because you're all bringing the best of what we think we need. Partnership, vision, outcomes focused, a sense that we're in it together for the long haul. So let's invest in these relationships and building up people and organizations. We have time for a speed round question here at the end. So I want to ask each of you, what is one particular hope you have for California or the work that you're doing in the next 5 to 10 years? And everyone should know I didn't prepare them with this question. Nathaniel, I'll put you on the spot first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, our hope, is it's been interesting to be part of the Red Cross and nationally trying to help move us into this like asset-based community development work, which is really different for the Red Cross. And so, I think my dream in this would just be to continue to build these collaboratives. These, and every community has this collaborative of hyper-local nonprofits, and that the state could help fund some of that, especially some of the administrative work to keep them together. And because it does. And Mark Stamen, who I think is a professor at Chico State, who also works on some of the climate adaptation, is a wonderful person. But he told me once, and I was stuck with me. He says, "You want to change the world? Change who you have lunch with."
I love it. Naimeen.
I echo that. I would love to see more breaking of silos, both at the institutional level. I think that what we heard today is that there's a lot of collaboration happening across agencies, and that we invest more in best practices rather than we're going to prohibit this, we're going to prohibit that. Even sustainable agriculture can be an example of how we tackle drought, how we tackle other multiple things. So using more holistic approaches and collaborating between agencies, but also with grassroots organizations that we know what we need in our communities.
So important. I second that. Megan.
I think these guys hit it on the head. I was going to talk about, breaking down silos and supporting partnerships. And the one thing I've observed is with the change in the political landscape over the last 9-10 months, partnerships are more important than ever. Partners have different capacities at different times, and we need to lift each other up. It's an ebb and flow of how we work together. And I want to see those partnerships hit the whole spectrum of planning all the way down to implementation and monitoring to make sure we're really having the effects that we want to have so that all Californians are more resilient to the changes that are coming.
Amanda, I'm going to give you the last word. For all of those who joined today and those that are learning about the adaptation strategy, what help do we need driving this forward?
What I love most about climate adaptation is, it's addressing an urgent risk and an existential challenge, but I really think that the work brings people together. So the more that we understand that we're partners in your effort to restore a forest and your effort to protect communities against extreme heat, the more we see ourselves as part of the same team. And I think that can not only accelerate our work to adapt to climate change, but address a lot of other important challenges.
At this moment in time, as Nathaniel mentioned, it's never been more important to bring people together and recognize our common humanity and the shared challenges we have. Thank you all so much for being on the panel and everyone for joining. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding this panel or this discussion of our speaker series, or suggestions for other discussions we should be having, please hit us up at this email, secretarysuggestions@resources.ca.gov. So many people across the state we could have featured here today. Huge thanks to those leaders who we heard from, and the countless others that are doing the important work across the state at the ground level to deliver true climate resilience.